Go ahead and imagine a family of four. Dad works at a factory, long hours, low pay, but enough to get by. Mom stays home and takes care of the kids because they can't afford daycare. One day Dad shows up at work and factory's closed, doors are locked. They find out that the company's been shipped overseas because of cheap labor in China. Dad's too proud to take government assistance, so he finds a minimum wage job. Neither he nor his wife have a high school diploma. They have no practical skills, no experience other than the one job. However, even if he was taking government assistance, they likely wouldn't be able to get by. Labor advocate Christine Owens, who's the executive director of the National Employment Law Project, published an article on December 3rd, 2013 in CNN titled "$7.25 an Hour is Not a Living Wage." And in it she notes that even those who are making minimum wage with government assistance have troubles paying for clothes, affording rent, etc. Now take this scenario and multiply it across millions of Americans. This is the issue with the shrinking middle class. So what exactly is the shrinking middle class? It's a demographic shift, and it's not necessarily shrinking so much as it's stretching. You have millions of Americans who were making middle income jobs, factories and whatnot, who have lost their jobs due to automation or outsourcing, and they've gone into the lower income brackets. And then you have those who were in the middle or lower and have moved up into the higher income brackets. And so this is what's causing it, or this is what it is it's this stretching out of the middle. And we have to ask, okay, what exactly is causing this? Well, outsourcing, yes, automation, but also entrepreneurship. In an article by Forbes contributor Maisei titled "Does It Pay to Become an Entrepreneur?" published January 3rd, 2013, Say notes that the vast majority of entrepreneurs come from the lowest two income quintiles. And because they start off with the lowest income, they ultimately have the greatest relative benefit. And so that moves them up much higher than they would have gone otherwise. But it's not just about income levels. The shrinking middle class is far more institutionalized than that. And if we look at changing demographics in economic mobility, this plays out fairly well. A study done by Harvard economist Lawrence Katz and Princeton economist Alan Krueger, published in Science magazine on April 24th of this year, titled "Documenting Decline in U.S. Economic Mobility," notes that economic mobility, the ability for someone to move out of where their income bracket is to a different one, has gone down consistently since the 1940s. And this lends itself to the idea that America is structured within some sort of institutional class system, that wherever you're born, whatever class you're in, is where you're going to stay. And this isn't everyone, of course, but it's generational. We see that about half of all children today not only make less than their parents, but make a significant amount less. This is the institutional aspects of the shrinking middle class. So, what is the cause of this? What's making it happen? Again, outsourcing, institutionalized decrease in economic mobility, and entrepreneurial gain. So what do we do? Because we know it's a problem. So there's those who are going up and there's those who are going down. The ones who go up, great, fantastic, that's awesome. We grow the pie, the economy becomes bigger. They're not stealing away from anyone else. It's not this idea of it's my share of the pie grows larger. So those are the people that we want to see continued success with. So we have to focus then on the lower income individuals, those people who don't have the same opportunities, those people who have lost their jobs due to outsourcing or automation. Those are the ones that we need to focus on. But we have to ask ourselves, how do we help these individuals? What is it that we can do? Well, going back to the Say article again, we know that the biggest advancements to the lowest income earners is entrepreneurial gain. Not only are they the vast majority of entrepreneurs, but they, as entrepreneurs, have the greatest relative increase in income. So those are the folks that we want to target. But many of the individuals in the lowest income brackets don't have the capital for a startup business. They have the ideas, they don't have the actual money to put it up. And so business-to-business website Best Innovation Group published an article on their website in August of this year titled "Why Community Banks Can't Afford to Wait and See About Faster Payment Innovations." And in this article it states that most of the loans to small business investors, small business entrepreneurs, come from small banks. So because these low-income individuals who are entrepreneurs have the business ideas but don't have the capital, they have to get the loans. Where the loans come from, the loans come from the small banks. But there's an issue with the small banks. What we've seen is an increase in regulation by the federal government over the past 20 or 30 years. And it's skyrocketed over time. Now, larger banks can handle this sort of regulatory burden. Someone has to be paid to make sure that they're compliant with the laws, they're filing all their paperwork, everything's done appropriately. But they can also afford what's known as fintech, financial technology. It's very expensive, but because the businesses are so large, it pays for itself in a relatively short time. Small banks are so close to cutting even that they can't afford this initial investment money. So they have to keep hiring people to come in and make sure that the regulations are followed. Because that's a new cost, they have to pull it away from somewhere. So they give out less loans. Loans are where small banks make the most of their money. So by reducing the number of loans to afford regulatory compliance, it ultimately increases their overall costs. And we've seen this in a decrease in the number of banks. So we have the divide. We have the lower income individuals who need the loans from the small banks, but the small banks are offering less loans, and there's less banks offering loans overall. So what do we do? Well, we can deregulate. That's one of the options, but we have to be careful because there's a concern that with banking deregulation, we could open ourselves up to a similar economic crash like the 07-08 financial crisis. And we have to understand, based on those views, the idea of too big to fail and risk assessment, massive conversations in economic theory right now, but ultimately this idea of deregulation. But we can't deregulate the large banks because they're the ones who engaged in the risky behavior that caused the financial crash. So then what do we do? Well, there are other banks other than these giant national and international corporations. There are small banks, which are banks that are valued under $10 billion off of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. There are community banks, which are a little bit more difficult to pin down, but they're essentially in a small region, and that's it. And then there are credit unions, in which if you put money into a credit union, you are now a joint investor in the actual credit union. You're a part owner. And so by that, it's connected to the community more so. So what we can do, instead of just broad deregulation, is selective and targeted deregulation on just these smaller banks, community banks, and credit unions, which, again, going back to the SAY article in the Best Investment Group, are the ones that provide the most economic benefit to entrepreneurs, which helps the most people and creates a system in which we have a solid middle class. Is it feasible? Yes. By and large, Republicans are in favor of what's known as laissez-faire economics. It's kind of a hands-off government approach to economic theory. So deregulation is always a plus. But then there's the Democrats. But the Democrats are even in support of it. Wall Street Journal columnist Yukon Hiyashi, in a June 13th article of this year titled "Elizabeth Warren Calls for Targeted Deregulation of Community Banks," notes that Senator Warren of Massachusetts, who's a member on the Senate's committee dealing with banking affairs, is in favor of selective deregulation. So it's feasible, and it's even likely. So what do you do? Well, call your reps, call your senators, send them emails, send them letters asking for this sort of a change. As we've seen with the AHCA, which was the Republican repeal bill of the ACA, community involvement matters. Calling out, reaching out makes a difference. So call your representative, call your senator, and email them. You can also support these entrepreneurs directly, make sure that their businesses are viable. Go out, buy their goods, be a frequent customer, because you're not just adding to a balance sheet, you're paying for some kids' piano lessons, ballet shoes, tap lessons. It makes a difference and it keeps these businesses alive. We can't just create an environment in which the middle class is viable, we have to ensure its sustained growth. The economy is nothing more than just tiny interactions on a personal basis. Every single instance of economic interaction has an effect on the overall economy. And this is what we have to do, is focus on the small, what's right in front of us, buy local, contact our reps, be good citizens, and we can and we will save the middle class.